Welcome to episode 56 of the J Bunny's Music Hub podcast. I'm your host, J Bunny. Well, everybody, this is a really great episode. For this episode, I was joined by Kevin Snell from Chmcl Str8jckt, who you might remember from the last episode. He sort of co-hosted this episode with me, and we interviewed John Bechdel, who produced the Chmcl Str8jckt album Dark Progression, which has been recently released. You may remember he had a little bit of input on the Chmcl Str8jckt episode, but this is a whole episode with John. We talk about his production work, we talk about his work with the bands Killing Joke, Fear Factory, Ascension of the Watchers, False Icons, Murder Inc. There's so many bands that he's been in, so much that he's done in his career, since starting in the 80s, and we covered a lot of it. Probably not all of it, but we covered a lot of it. It was such a great interview. It was such a great time. I did not mention in the start of the interview that I was drinking Ghost Hawk, but of course I was. I think that I was just a little bit overwhelmed with what was about to happen with this interview. I think that you guys will enjoy it. Without further ado, here's John.
Alrighty, what's up, everybody? It's J Bunny. I am here at the Chmcl Str8jckt headquarters, and joining me today is John Bechdel, a man of many projects, many hats, we'll say, and also joining us is Kevin Snell from Chmcl Str8jckt, or at his base of operations here. How's it going today, guys?
Good, very good. We had a nice weekend.
Well, that's great. So, John, I have to say, I generally like to feel like I'm prepared when I do these interviews by doing some research ahead of time, but honestly, it was hard to find information about you. Like, I was able to find information about, like, bands you were in and stuff, but it seems like every website just copy and pasted your biography from Wikipedia, which is like 4 sentences long. Mm-hmm. And that biography states that John Bechdel was born on August 23rd, 1964, and is an American keyboardist. He's been part of bands such as Ministry, Fear Factory, Abstinence, Prong, Killing Joke, Murder Inc., and Brian Brain. He has since worked with False Idols, Ascension of the Watchers, and more recently with the bands Nukes, along with Chris Conley and Esh, Mario Cabada, and many more. Bechdel's sister is a cartoonist and author, Allison Bechdel. John has mentioned in her memoir, Fun Home, and is a major character in the musical adaptation. Obviously, I'm sure there's more to you than just this paragraph. The first thing I wanted to ask you is, when did you first get involved in music?
Well, first, let's just say it's False Icons, not False Idols.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
You know what? I have that written down, and I just said it wrong. Excuse me.
It's happened before. How did I get started in music?
Yeah.
Well, at an early age, I took an interest in music. Started playing piano when I was 5 and listened to a lot of music. My father had an extensive collection of Beatles and Stones and some obscure 60s and 70s rock, some, maybe Blind Faith and things like that, and a huge classical collection. So I was exposed to a lot of classical music, and I played classical, and eventually took an interest in guitar, acoustic guitar. I played a little folk guitar, classical guitar, and then also got into electric guitar, and then was interested in bands like King Crimson, Robert Fripp, and Brian Eno, and how they did experimental things with the electric guitar, and began doing more experimental things myself with electric guitar. And then I discovered synthesizers, and that's when it hit home that this is the instrument for me, because as a pianist, I was familiar with the keyboard, experimenting with electronics. I had a real interest in that, and the synthesizer offered the best of both worlds. By then I was already, playing in high school in cover bands and experimenting with writing my own music, and even building my own sound systems and lighting systems and controllers, and even building my own guitars, and just experimenting. And I didn't have a lot of mentors, so I was really just kind of on my own. But I was pretty young when I knew that music was my future. Probably 7 or 8 years old.
Okay, wow.
And then it was time to go to college, and I was like, "Fuck,"
It's all right. It's the internet.
Yeah, no, this is okay.
You can fuck all you want.
Okay, I was like, fuck, I don't want to just, go to a conventional college and learn conventional things, because I know what I want to do. I'm really interested in electronic music, and I was very interested in computers. This was the very early days, and this was like, 1981-ish, even in high school. It was a very new thing to teach about computers in my senior year. And so I did want to learn about computers because I felt that there must be some way to use computers to interface and control synthesizers. That somehow that just seemed like something that should happen and probably would happen, and it did happen. But my forays into programming were short. I decided I wasn't cut out for programming, code and things like that. But I knew, I built a small oscillator circuit in college, and definitely by then focusing more on music production and programming, synthesizers. Used some very early computer interfaces and computer, synthesizers, but the technology started to become available, and the MIDI was invented when I was in college, the first universal standardized interface medium to connect all manufacturers' devices together. And then the Macintosh came out just when I was finishing up college, but they hadn't been using it yet to do music. It wasn't until post-college that some of the first MIDI interfaces came out for the Macintosh and some of the early sequencers, which I started using. So at that point was using computer-based sequencing from the mid-'80s into the late '80s, and it's kind of in its infancy. Still before digital recording, now computers can do everything, not only the recording, but the mixing and the signal processing, and it can even emulate the synthesizers, virtual technology. So now, all you need is a laptop and, nice interface and a pair of headphones or something to do all the things that we needed. Reel-to-reel tape machines and drum machines and stacks of synthesizers and racks and signal processing to do music. So yeah, in college, I eventually kind of formulated a band and started composing original music, and then for my final project, I actually recorded in a professional recording studio, multi-track studio, and then I was ready to kind of set out on a journey, to become a professional musician. And I decided to make the move to New York City from central Massachusetts, where I'd gone to college and had been living for about a year afterwards. And that's when things really started happening for me. I immediately got offered a gig in a band that was playing out in the New York City area, and then eventually did some of my first tours, and then that segued into me joining one of my all-time favorite bands called Killing Joke.
So that takes us right into what I was going to ask you next, which, if I'm piecing everything together right from the discography I was able to find on the website discogs.com, it says that you had a release with a band, Brian Brain, in '89, and then you were with Killing Joke, and then Murder Inc. after that in the early '90s before joining Prong in '93. What were some highlights of that period of your career?
Well, like I said, the first band was called Brian Brain, or like you said, but I was describing with Martin Atkins, who was the drummer from Public Image Limited, Pill, Johnny Lydon. And so it was immediately like I was this 22-year-old, just moved to New York, and suddenly I was playing with someone famous, and we're not only playing, some of the famous clubs in New York City, but also touring parts of the country, and doing my first recording, which was the Brian Brain EP. And Martin joined Killing Joke, and that's how I got hooked up through Killing Joke. But I was just a huge fan ever since high school, since they first came out. And even through college, and they were still pretty obscure, at least in the U.S., underground, but almost like a cult status kind of band. Not many people knew about them, but the people that did know about them were just obsessed with them. And they were just a band apart. They weren't like anything else. They weren't new wave. They weren't punk. They weren't metal. They weren't hardcore. They weren't rock and roll. I mean, nobody knew what they really were. And it didn't matter because they were Killing Joke, and they had their own sound. They used synthesizers, but they also had a post-punk kind of edge, and even some elements of metal, the intensity of metal, which I did like, because I was not brought up on metal. I was brought up on electronic music and punk and hardcore, but not metal per se. So that was my beginning. So, so really kind of propelled from one thing to another very quickly. So I got the opportunity to work with Killing Joke and record on their album Extremities, Dirt and Various Repressed Emotions, which recorded in London in the summer of 1990. So I quit my job and bought a plane ticket to London. Had never been out of the country, and I brought a sampler and a synthesizer and some of the newer technology that they had not really known about. They knew about sampling, but this was a higher level of sampling technology, newer type of sampling technology, and some newer synthesis technology. And just kind of bringing some new blood and some new ideas. Even though most of the songs were written, one of the songs was still in development. It was called Inside the Termite Mound, and that was one that I got to really kind of add and contribute to, which was very special. Really enjoyed playing that song, but nonetheless was essentially a hired gun, a live member per se. But I did work in the studio. I was credited on the album as additional sounds and technical support, and I did play a lot of the guide tracks and some of the tracks that were still used on the record, and I did play a couple of the keyboard parts on the album. So like I said, at that point I was maybe 25, 26 years old, recording in some of the most prestigious studios in London and perhaps the world, and then working with one of my all-time favorite bands. And ultimately that led to touring, which then was touring Europe, places I'd never been to Europe before, and more extensive touring in the U.S. My first shows were done on the West Coast, and found myself, in my mid-20s, being a professional musician, which is what I set out to do.
Oh, that's fantastic. And then, as I mentioned, from there you went to the Prong.
Well, Murder Inc. was kind of an offshoot of Killing Joke. It was most of the members of Killing Joke, but it featured Chris Conley on vocals from Ministry and Revolting Cocks and Finitribe. And we made one record, but then Killing Joke reformed with their Pandemonium record, and then the bass player Paul Raven and I joined Prong,
Right.
and that was kind of like a foray into metal for me. And we made the Prong Cleansing album, which was a landmark record, really. We toured with White Zombie and Pantera and Sepultura and Bad Brains, and we headlined U.S. and Europe, and that was a monumental record. People are still talking about that Pantera tour, and you can still hear "Snap Your Fingers, Snap Your Neck" on the radio. We were featured on Beavis and Butthead and MTV.
Right,
so
right.
yeah, so by my late 20s, I was kind of a veteran rock musician.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, that record and that single, like, how does it feel to just have that on your resume?
Well, I mean, at that time, like I said, in my late 20s, already kind of a veteran, and then I went on to start producing, which was a passion that I had. I had this degree in music production, and I had worked with some amazing producers by then. Steve Albini did the Murder Inc. record, and Terry Date did the Prong record, and so I learned, working with some of the best engineers in the world and producers, and was fascinated with the mic placement and choice of microphones and things that that producers should know about. Not all producers. Some producers, they're not really technical people. They just use engineers to do that. They just have a vision and a kind of a name for.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've heard of certain people that have a reputation for being a certain way.
Well, yeah, like one of my favorite producers. Well, I mean, Steve Lillywhite would be one. Bear with me here. Produced Art of Noise. He was in the Buggles. Produced Seal. Trevor Horn.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So yes, one of my favorite producers, and I saw a documentary with him recently where he said, "Yeah, hey, I had engineers. I didn't know anything about technology. I was just like mind blown."
The vision,
so I was more of a nuts and bolts kind of guy, and but I didn't have a lot of money to start out. I just had the basic microphones, quality microphones. I had a professional reel-to-reel machine and like an old Soundcraft console, and just a little bit of outboard gear, but gradually built up into digital mixing and then onto digital recording, because at first, some of the digital technology was not, I mean, it was kind of thin, it didn't have the low end. I mean, I was an analog kind of guy, but the future was coming, and it was in digital. And so, I did that, and eventually started recording and producing on digital and mixing in digital, and learning plugins were invented, and started using plug-in technology, but always, just really kind of having to beg, borrow, and steal, to kind of, build it up. I didn't have a lot of money, but I did have a vision, and I knew what I wanted to do. I started producing bands in 1995. So,
okay, wow.
I've basically a 25-year career of producing, and now with doing Chmcl Str8jckt, we've achieved something that neither one of us done, like create something that's charted on rock radio, national metal radio.
I was going to say, I feel silly that because your name came to my attention in relation to Str8jckt. Like, I was familiar with the bands that you were in, but I was not aware of your production work until then. So now I feel like, wow, I missed out on all of this other stuff.
Well, I have been in a lot of ways a shadowy figure. These bands that I've worked with, of course, are monumental and influential, but yeah, I'm kind of like a footnote in a lot of those bands. But
there was a documentary made about John 2 years ago.
A few years back, yeah, where we wanted to capture, get some of this information out there. And by the way, we are trying to upgrade that Wikipedia page. I've added a lot of material, and
we've had that discussion before.
It's a little embarrassing because people, keep bringing it up, and it's time to update that. But
the title of the documentary about you is
Killing the Joke. Yes, and it's on Vimeo, and it tells the story. It tells a lot, but not all of it. There's still, so many things. Last night, I did an interview with Kevin for Straight Talk, Ghost Wave, and we covered some stuff that probably people haven't even heard yet. And I've I didn't set out to be necessarily like a household name or anything like that. I just wanted to make music and be in bands and work in studios and be able to make a living making music. Of course, when I was younger, I think I had the same fantasies that we all had of being a rock star and everything. And I got to thinking about it, and I'm thinking well, I suppose it's kind of like bittersweet, to not be able to walk out the door and be yourself, and then always having these expectations that once you're this famous rock star, you got to kind of stay there. You know what I mean? And to me, I just wanted to make quality music, be happy with what I do. So, and I'm kind of quiet, kind of more introverted type of person. But with the development of my own band, False Icons, I found myself thrust from behind the keyboard to being a frontman, and it turned out that it was kind of natural for me. I'm not one of those people. I never liked the bands that run around like high-fiving and handing out shots and talking for 20 minutes between every song. I was just like a no-nonsense kind of guy. Let's just play the music and let the music speak for itself. But I did find that even though Kevin and I were talking this morning, and it was like, wow, I mean, if you think about it, after being in all those bands, to have the nerve and the balls to be able to go out and say, I'm going to do my own thing.
Well, right. I was going to ask you what inspired that.
Well, I mean, stupidity, because a smart person probably wouldn't do that. But I still had more in me that I couldn't do with these other bands, even though I got to contribute on some levels. I was a producer, I was a songwriter, I was a programmer. I had way more to offer, and that's one of the reasons I left Fear Factory, because I wasn't breaking out of that just kind of hired gun live member kind of guy. Even though I did get to contribute on a small scale, I had more to offer, and I felt that I still had my own thing to do, and I'm a humble person, so I knew that I'm not going to go out and be playing large clubs like the bands that I was in or have the kind of following, but I never cared about any of that. To me, playing to 50 people was no different than playing to 50,000 people.
Right.
In fact, sometimes I got more of a thrill, at least interfacing with people, because my first big festival, the thing I noticed most was the people were so far away, they looked like ants, and it was just this massive sea. It was very surreal, but it didn't have the intimacy and the kind of interaction that you get from being in a club and just, seeing the people like right there, and just, just like the connection that you get. So I always knew that we would be starting out small, and I had no problem with that. I suppose some people would find that difficult, and in some cases when bands that are really big end up kind of like going down, I think they have a struggle dealing with that, know. I'm just not one of those people. As long as anybody's interested in what I'm doing, I'm happy, and I'm not in it for the money or in it for the fame or glory or anything like that. I really am in it because that's what I do, and it's what drives me and what keeps me going. But it is great when people do appreciate it. Like one time I was doing an interview for False Icons, and the interviewer said, I was interviewing a band like last week, and I asked the keyboard player who his most influential keyboardist was, and he mentioned John Bechdel. I'm like, well, that's kind of like the biggest honor you can have. And, from time to time, I'll be somewhere or flying somewhere, and someone will recognize me and stuff. So it kind of, makes you feel, appreciated. And I've worked with some of the most amazing people. So it's kind of like, worked with Joey Jordison from Slipknot. He played drums on the first Ministry tour that I did. And, working with Al Jorgensen and the guys from Killing Joke. Being on, say, like Mike Scascia from Ministry, and then with that first incarnation of Ministry that I was in, Tommy Victor from Prong and Paul Raven. So there was all this kind of, people that I had worked with in the past, and it was kind of like coming full circle. And it had its moments, but there's so much work also that I think people don't realize that goes involved. They just think it's like, wow, this sounds so amazing, and there are moments, there are special moments, but they're kind of few and far between where you really feel that sense of like, wow, But another thing too is that some people, they might say, hey, yeah, like 20 years ago I did this, I was in this band that had a little bit of notoriety, and we kind of put out a record. But for me, literally a 33-year career of professional touring and working with some of the most influential bands of modern music. So that's pretty exciting. But yet my real passion is doing my own thing, and now I have a solo record that I'm doing. It's just me. False Icons is more of a band, although I'm the main writer. It's a live band with a drummer and a bass player and a keyboard player, and I play guitar and sing. Still, doing new things. I have a band with Burton C. Bell from Fear Factory called Ascension of the Watchers.
And I wanted to ask you about that. I don't mean to cut you off, but there was something that you're in that band with Burton, Ascension of the Watchers, and I just wanted to know how that came together, because when I was doing the research, I found a Blabbermouth article that described you as a mentor in music, philosophy, and demeanor who unwittingly guided Bell along the creative path of this new conceptual movement.
Wow, who did I pay to do that? Wasn't.
So I'll have to do that when I get interviewed. I'm gonna make Burton.
Well, So I guess I am a very humble person, but sometimes I should just go ahead and take credit. So let's say Burton had come to visit me at my home and studio and loved the country atmosphere and the idea of a studio in the woods, and he said he would like to come back and record there. So I was like, great, let's do it. So after that was the Digimortal tour for Fear Factory. We had some time, kind of a hiatus for Fear Factory, and he drove cross country from LA to Pennsylvania, and all he brought was a guitar and like a multi-effect pedal, and I thought he would be bringing some kind of demo song, something comprehensive, that I could, wrap myself around. So
like I do.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yes. So I got behind the desk, and he pulled out his guitar, and I've never heard him play guitar, and he started plucking away, and he had this delay pedal that he was kind of using the delays to kind of carry the tune, and it was very rudimentary and elementary, and he clearly wasn't a really developed guitar player, but I quickly gathered myself together, and like any professional producer has to do, and I was like, okay, well, yeah, it's kind of mesmerizing, the way it just kind of looped around and stuff. And then I got to thinking, well, it makes sense because I've spent time living with Burton when I was working with Fear Factory, and his CD collection, there's no metal, maybe some Black Sabbath records. And my CD collection, you're not going to find any metal. Probably the most metal thing would be a D. Krups Metallica tribute. And so then it clicked. Okay, this isn't a Fear Factory record, because that's what I thought it was going to sound like. And it made perfect sense that Burton wanted to do something very different. And I had all these vintage synthesizers sitting around collecting dust that weren't getting used in these metal bands that I was in, and I thought, wow, what a perfect opportunity to use some of these synths and some of these wonderful sound banks that I haven't used, and to really go back to my roots. And so I started to realize that Burton and I did have some common ground, say like with Joy Division and early Cure. He was a big Nick Cave fan. I did not know Nick Cave that well, even though he was on Mute Records. It was a little bit more of a goth industrial thing, which I did not, wasn't too much into goth. I mean, I like Susie and the Banshees and the Cure, but I was more of an industrial and also electronic guy. I was a big Kraftwerk fan, and bands like Cabaret Voltaire and Depeche Mode. So yeah, we started to build around these guitar ideas and add some rhythmic loops and program some drums, and then I tinkered around with, I play a little bass, and at this point he still had no lyrics or vocal ideas. It was strictly music. And we put together a few songs, Moonshine, Residual Presence, through some of the first songs, Evading. And I asked him at one point, I said, so, who's going to produce this album? And he goes, well, you are. So then I realized that I was going to have, a bigger role and more responsibility, and we were really close at that point, and we worked well together, but it took time. A good producer and a good musician always gets better, always improving their skills, and I hear things, and sometimes totally learn new production techniques and develop new writing styles. But at the same time that Ascension of the Watchers was formed, I solidified my own band, False Icons, which had already been kind of in the works with a guy named Brian Brote, a local guy that I had met when I first moved back to Pennsylvania. And at first it was supposed to be kind of like a duo, just electronic, probably no guitars, no vocals or anything like that, techno music. And it was cool, but I thought, even at that time, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was plenty of laptop bands to go around. And I thought, like, I've been in all these organic bands, that played live, and had amazing drummers. Like, why would I not go, have some of that influence in my music? So I decided to add a live drummer, and then we're working with a bass player, and it turned into a band, and then my bass player sang a bit, I sang a bit, just by default, and then turned out I was singing on every track, and so I suddenly realized, and at one point I thought I was just going to play keyboards for this band, and I started playing more and more guitar, which I had not done in a long time, really, since Brian Brain played guitar in a band. So suddenly I just found myself being the front man. It seemed weird to be like with Killing Joke. Jazz was the keyboard player and the singer. Doesn't work too good. He eventually, in order to be a front man, had to hire another guy to play the keyboards. And then so I'm thinking about, what would it be like if I was singing in behind the keyboard? And I'm like, it'd be great if it worked, but just didn't see it working. So like I said, I was playing more guitar, singing more. So I thought, well, I guess I'm going to play guitar and sing, and then somebody else is going to play the keyboards. And then I got a bass player and a drummer. So so that's how False Icons came together. And it's the same time period that the Watchers happened, from 2002 and 2003 into 2004. Those years that Fear Factory was on hiatus is when that all happened, and we started doing our first shows in 2005 together, playing shows together and touring together, the Watchers and False Icons, doing double duty. I ultimately did one more record with Fear Factory called the Archetype record, and did a little touring on that. We went to Australia, played the Big Day Out. We did the Slipknot Jägermeister tour, and then I decided it was time to move on from Fear Factory. And I wanted to really give a go with False Icons, which sounds maybe a bit crazy to some people, but like I said, I wasn't really going anywhere. It was just really a gig with Fear Factory, and I felt I had more to offer at that point in my life. I was into my late 30s, you know. I spent a year getting false icons off the ground, and then got a call from Paul Raven about joining ministry at the end of 2005, and ultimately took that job in early 2006. And so then, once again, false icons
said something.
got put on hold.
He said no.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah.
He said no to me.
I did. I know. At the time, I had 3 young children, and the idea of going on an extensive tour seemed to be a bit much. My first thoughts were like, as much as it would add to my resume, you know, I mean, it is a logical progression when you think about it. You know, family's important, and I felt like, well, hey, anybody can just go New World Order, New World Order. You know, like, they don't need me, and then they kept talking to me about saying how, we do it old school style. By then, a lot of bands were using backing tracks and computers, and like, no, we use Akai samplers, and you, too, have a career of using the Akai samplers live, and we've only talked to a few other people that could even remotely do this job, and we didn't feel too confident with them, so they called me back a few weeks later and said, would you just come out at least and map out all the songs for this album, the Rio Grande Blood album. Maybe we can by then find a keyboard player that you could work with and train. And I was like, yeah, I can do that. So I flew out, and Al picked me up, and we worked in his studio for a couple of weeks. And we're also going through archives of not only Ministry stuff, but Revolting Cocks stuff for the Revolting Cocks tour. Because after he parted ways with Paul Barker, I mean, Al ended up with about half of the stuff. And so I just literally had to dig through boxes of old floppy disks and hard drives and zip disks to find what I needed. Later, they were able to extrapolate pretty much everything off of master tapes into Pro Tools, but at that time, it was whatever you could find in his garage.
You know, that initial run of Ministry was from like 06 to 08, and then, you know, Al had said pretty publicly, you know, that he was going to ride out into the sunset with George W. Bush and end the band. And, you know, they were gone for 3 years. Did you think at that point, like, that there was any chance? Because
we all took bets. I think I was probably the one that got it best. But, you know, to be fair to Al, I mean, he was in very poor health. He really didn't think he could do it. And he wanted to maybe try some other things. He'd been doing it his whole life.
Right.
So he thought maybe getting more into production. And he started his own label and built a studio. But sadly, labels were dying and big studios were dying, and he didn't die, so, you know, he had to move on and pay the bills. And so, he came back with the album Relapse and called me up and said, what do you think? And we had lost our guitar player, Mike Skasha, right after that tour. Then he found himself once again like, what do I do? How do I go on without Mikey? He was my right-hand man, you know. He co-wrote a lot of these great records with me, and once again we were looking at whether or not there would be a future for Ministry, and a couple of years went by. He did make a record called From Beer to Eternity, which did feature some of Mikey's last contributions, and it offered a little bit of a divergence from the kind of speed metal that we were doing on, say, Rio Grande Blood and Last Sucker and the House of the Mole, which I felt was the kind of comeback record for Al. He had gotten clean and refocused. It's the first album without Paul Barker, and it really had a lot of the elements, I think, of, say, The Mind and Psalm 69, you know, which we had, as Ministry fans, really kind of missed. And so I was at Cold Waves 3. False Icons played the kickoff party, and I was, you know, walking around like, yeah, I'm in Ministry, and, you know, and everybody was just like, yeah, we don't really talk about Ministry here. I'm like, wait, Cold Waves? Chicago industrial metal, and Jason Novak, who runs it, you know, come up to talk to me, and I was like, I just got off the phone with Al Jorgensen, you know, and I was like, Yeah, we don't really talk about him either, you know. I was like, wow, what kind of Chicago industrial festival is this, you know? Because Al had called me about going back out to tour from Beer to Eternity, and this would have been late 2014, planning on touring extensively in 2015, going around the world, Australia, South Africa, South America, places I had never been before, and Central America, and then also an extensive North American tour. And I said yes, once again. And this time we had to use some more modern technology. Those old Akais just weren't going to make it around the world again. They were too heavy and expensive to ship, for one thing. And so nobody was making samplers anymore. So I had to go to using computer-based sampling, but I found a way to do it playing the original samples. Native Instruments makes a program called Contact with a K. It could actually read the Akai programs. Now, not necessarily everything, mostly the maps, the tunings, the envelopes, but not per se the output routings and some of the other nuanced parameters. So it was quite a job to do. But I did it, and now I can still play the original samples, but playing them off of laptops instead of dedicated hardware samplers. And we've delved into Ableton, and some of the more sophisticated stuff now does require, you know, some playback and stuff. So yeah, we've been catching up with modern times, and we're all set to go out last year on a trip to Japan, Australia, and also to do the Industrial Strength Tour with KMFDM and Frontline Assembly last year, which unfortunately COVID hit. And so now we've been on hiatus, but we do have a new Ministry album completed.
All right, awesome.
I may have heard it. I may not have.
May or may not have.
May or may not have.
I can't confirm nor deny.
Now,
can I ask a quick question? Why was Ministry persona non grata at Cold Waves? Why would they not talk about it?
I think because Jason was real tight with Chris Connolly. They had a band, and they had various incarnations of Revolting Cocks, you know, the Cocks or the Cocks members or Cocks this or that or whatever. They eventually did just flat out call it Revolting Cocks. And Chris Connolly, and at that time, Al Jorgensen, you know, had not been on speaking terms. They'd both written books that said bad things about each other. And so, yeah, it just seemed odd to me, like I said, that you could have a Chicago-based industrial music festival and not even mention the word ministry. But we found out later, and I actually was instrumental in reacquainting Chris Connolly and Al. Because you know, after doing Murder Inc. with Chris Connolly, I bumped into him at the Cold Waves, and still not knowing, you know, that ministry was kind of like, you know, blacklisted. I just went up to him and talked to him, and he was like, "It's great to see you." And over Facebook, we would communicate, and when we were finishing up the album Americant, actually that was the day it released. I was at Al's having coffee, and Chris Connolly sent me a Facebook message saying, "Hey man, I'm listening to the new album. It's really amazing. I want you to, you know, let Al know when you see him." And I'm like, "Well, I'm sitting here with him right now having coffee, so I'll tell him." So I was like, "Hey Al, Chris Connolly really likes the record," and Al said, "Why don't you ask him if he'll come out and like sing So What with us when we get to Chicago?" But it had to be a big secret, you know. It's like I got to keep it all on the down low. So it was a really big surprise. So we were playing the Riviera sold-out show in Chicago. Chris showed up at sound check. Even people in the opening band didn't even know what was happening. And Burton C. Bell was a guest vocalist on that tour, and so he came out a few times and sang. And then when we got to So What, Al said, "Well, I have a very special surprise tonight, guest singer," and everybody thought he was just bringing Burton out again. And then Chris Connolly walks on stage, and now I would have to say it was about 50-50 people that recognized him. You know, he didn't have the long dreads anymore. Right. You know, it had been like 30 years. Some people thought maybe he was Burton, but yet...
But if you know Chris, the nose.
Yeah, well,
you look at the nose.
Nonetheless, let's just say 2,200 people rose to their feet and started cheering and knew what was happening, and we broke out into So What, which was really a Chris Connolly song.
Right.
Awesome.
And he and Al sang it together. So yeah, so I was like the matchmaker there. And also, people always talk about the old ministry versus the new ministry, and there's a whole bunch of factions, and even some people that think the first album was the one, and hey, I'm there too. I'm a ministry fan, first, and I'm the first one to agree, but it's not 1989, and even if you could put, sadly, most of those people are gone now, Bill Rieflin and Mike Scotia and William Tucker, Paul Raven, but even if you could put all those people back on the stage, do you think it would sound like the Mind Tour? No, people grow, they mature, they change, and they should, and so ministry persevered, and it moved on, and it stayed relevant, and it continued to make music. I think I had another thing to say about the kind of bridging, mending of some of these relationships. But back to your question one more time.
The question that we were on was, did you think that ministry was done for good?
Okay, right. So that also played into this Wax Trax tour that we did. It was also kind of bizarre. It kind of came up at a time when we were still working on starting a new record, and we didn't know much about it. It was really weird. It was like not a conventional tour because the tickets were going to be free, but you had to get them in a certain way, like on a National Record Store Day, which I had never even heard of. And you had to
This
be...
was in support of the documentary,
yeah,
right?
in support of the Wax Trax documentary, and there was going to be a band called Cold Cave, and they really wanted Ministry to do it, and they were going to show the documentary and have these two bands perform. And so it was something that really had never been done. And we were thinking, do these people know what they're doing? And they hadn't announced the venue, so we're like, this is like a month away. Who in the hell can book a tour and not have venues a month away? So we were scratching our heads. And then also there was this kind of idea that in order for us to get the gig, we had to somehow get Paul Barker back in the band. And there had been discussion and talk because there's these factions, and there's some people that refuse to listen or even acknowledge ministry post Barker. The idea that
That's crazy.
Well, the idea that he my theory is that because Al was incapacitated on drugs and alcohol, that Paul kind of became the spokesman of the band and more profile, and he had been with them through a lot of these records, and Paul is really talented, but I think, to me, I just kept thinking, like, well, really Al's the brainchild, and what did Paul do after ministry? I mean, he's doing stuff, but for many years he really didn't do much of anything. He had a band called USSA, which didn't really do much, but then he played with Pucifer, and then he put out new Lead into Gold, and he opened for Ogre, and I happened to run into him then at the Ogre show and got to talk to him a little bit just prior to this kind of Wax Trax thing. And Al had even several times, people had said, look, if you could get Paul Barker back in the band, you guys could probably go back to playing in arenas and stuff like that. This would be, you'd be bringing together all the factions again. And even though they had a falling out, Al was like kind of willing to bury the hatchet. And they'd reached out to Paul a few times, but he was kind of like, not really, ready, not that he wasn't totally interested, but just wasn't quite ready to make that leap. And then this Wax Trax tour somehow, made it so they once again reached out to him, and he still was a little bit like just, not ready. I think he wanted to be back in as a full, have half the publishing and everything that he used to have. I was kind of like, that's not going to happen, but we'd love to have you on the tour. And so Paul ultimately declined, and we thought, well, that's that. So we thought it wasn't happening. And then the Wax Trax people came back and said, no, we still want you. So then it was back on. And that, when we brought back some of the stuff that the Wax Trax era stuff, some of the songs that, for instance, Burning Inside, that Al had said he would never do again, and we finally got to do that, and we brought back Supernaut from Thousand Homo DJs, and we even tinkered with some Palehead stuff, but it didn't really happen, but there's always potential for that. And then Paul came out on some of those tours to do Q&A after the documentary, and Chris Conley, not on the same one, so it was kind of like East Coast, West Coast. I think Paul did West Coast and Chris did East Coast. And so there was, a lot of pictures of Al with Chris Connolly and with Paul Barker. So, there was some talk about wow, could this be?
Yeah.
And then there was talk about some tribute, like maybe a Mine tribute or a Psalm tribute or a Filth Pig tribute tour, but ultimately, if you think about it, some of us have been in ministry way longer than any of those other people were. I've been in 15 years now, and Sin almost as long. Now I've got Paul D'Amour from Tool on bass, and working with a new drummer, London May, who will be coming out with us when we do start touring again. So you just can't go back. And Al is like, I've done that, I've done this, I've done that. Because we were, after the Wax Tracks thing, we're like, let's bring back some of that Wax Track style. And he was just like, I can do that for 8 bars and then I'm over it, So,
when does Stephen George come back?
Well, people have said about that too, because a lot of people don't even know. Like, they're like, what about the original guys, like Martin Atkins? And they're like, hello.
So I wanted to circle back on Ascension of the Watchers and False Icons, if we could, for a second. What I wanted to ask in regard to Ascension of the Watchers was, Burton has departed Fear Factory now, and has said that and other projects are going to be his focus now. So is there more music happening for Ascension of the Watchers at this time? Or
Well, we just released an album.
Right, it just came out back in October.
Yeah, so, and we can't really tour. So we're doing some remixes to help promote the record. We're just going to have to, like everybody else, see what happens. But yeah, let's see, 12 years in between the first and second record, so don't get, don't hold your breath.
Sure. And then as far as False Icons, what I could find is that you guys put out a record in 2008.
Same thing, on Al's label, yeah. And then, not too much. I did a self-produced EP around 2013, and toured the band in 13 and 14, and then I got back into ministry, and so since then we had 5 consecutive years of ministry. So I was still working on some False Icons, but ministry was my main priority. But now with last year being off, I got False Icons back up and running. We did 2 shows, one with Chmcl Str8jckt in February and January, and then COVID hit, and ministry went dark, and everybody went dark, and that included False Icons. So I'm working on new False Icons and hoping to get that back up and running and release another album. Maybe even release that EP, which a lot of people haven't heard, So, when you're involved with so many things, it's hard. And I'm quality over quantity. Some bands just crank stuff out constantly.
Right.
And, it's hit or miss. I'm just not one of those people, I'd rather take my time and do it right.
Okay. In addition to all of the other stuff that we talked about, like I said, a lot of the information that I pulled was from the website discogs.com.
Which is comprehensive for my accomplishments, but it doesn't tell you the backstory.
Right.
Wikipedia is really,
And so one thing that I saw on Discogs that I want, just because I'm always skeptical when it comes to the internet, you've got to be. And so one of the things that it said on that site was that you have some credits on releases by Davy Jones of the Monkees. And I wanted to know first, is that true?
That's true.
And then secondly, if it is, how did that come to be?
Okay, well, I started producing in 1995 when I moved back to Pennsylvania. I always wanted, not always, but at a certain point, after working at Pachyderm Studios doing the Murder Inc. record, there was a 40-acre estate outside Minneapolis, world-class studio in the woods, and I was like, wow, this is the way to work. Not these, dingy, dirty New York studios that, you might get mugged when you walk out the door. And sometimes when we recorded albums, you walk out to your car and your equipment was stolen, in the 5 minutes it took you to take your drum kit into the studio, so I was over all that, just having to be really careful, having an arsenal of vintage synthesizers in an apartment, because I'd heard stories about people trying to do projects, maybe with this hip hop band, they show up and duct taped him to the chair and took all of his equipment. So I was over that. And the first band I produced in that studio, I did a little bit of Prong stuff with Raven and Ted. They came down. That was the very first thing when we first set up the studio. And then I started working with some local bands, some punk bands and some alternative bands. And one of them was a guy named John Blair who worked with Davy Jones, who also lived in the area.
Okay.
Beaver Springs, which was 15 minutes, 20 minutes away from my studio, and he had been recording with this guy, John Blair, and John Blair discovered my studio and was recording in it, and he said, I'd like to do a record with Davey, and I'm like, great. So, yeah, next thing I know, with my 3rd or 4th client in the woods,
That's great.
Car rolls up, and Davy Jones gets out and comes in, starts singing in my studio.
That's awesome.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, how we mentioned earlier you produced Chemical Str8jckt. How did they come to your attention?
Well, do you want to jump in? Okay, so
You tell it better.
okay, well, we have a mutual friend, Sandy Datcher, who loves live music, loves to go to concerts, and she had been trying to snag tickets for Thrill Kill Call.
Well, actually, it just showed up on my Instagram, like reduced ticket or $10 tickets to Thrill Kill Call.
But
You were already on tour.
Yeah, but you wanted to see
I
Thrill
did,
Kill
I
Call.
did, and it just like magically just like
Okay.
rolled up on my IG feed, and I'm like, dang, this is like destiny. And I reached out to.
Well, there were these free. No,
No,
not
they
free.
were $10
Yeah,
tickets.
okay, yeah.
$10, and like, I'll go see Thrill Kill Call for $10, sure. And there were 2 dates. There was a New York date and then a Jersey date, like almost back to back. You were already on tour, and I was trying to fill my days with, good music while you were gone. And I hit up the person who made the post. I had no idea that it was actually Kevin Snell from Chmcl Str8jckt. I thought it was just some PR firm, like handing out tickets or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, how can I get the tickets? He's like, yeah, just PayPal me $10 and I'll mail them to you. I PayPal you $10. I'm like, I don't have a PayPal account that's working. So we're like kind of working through that. And then it dawned on me that, I was actually talking to Kevin Snell from Chmcl Str8jckt. And then I'm like, who the hell is that? I don't know who they are. So
Well, you started talking to him,
Yeah, just
and the
randomly.
tickets arrived in
yeah,
the mail.
yeah, they came in the mail.
And he's like, just forget about the $10 or
Yeah,
something.
pretty much, yeah. And then he sent me 2 sets of tickets for the New York show and the Jersey show.
A CD, a couple
Couple,
stickers.
yeah, stickers. I mean,
Take
the whole
So
fan
Nobody else
pack
wants
showed
it.
up.
the next thing I know, I'm getting a call from Sandy saying that she's going to this show and starting to talk about this band Chmcl Str8jckt, which I had not heard of either. And then she went, and really, you stole the show, right?
Well, yeah, prior to that, when I was just doing my research, just trying to figure out who they were, the video came up, Dressed to Kill, on
great
YouTube.
video.
That was the only thing I could find. Nothing else. No Wikipedia, no other anything. And when the video came up, and I see Kevin rolling in on the motorcycle with the Ministry helmet on, and I listened to him, like, it was badass. It was so good. I'm like, I just assumed that they all knew each other. Then I just kind of, you always assume that famous people know famous people, actors know actors, and musicians know musicians.
Well, that you had been around
That
for
you had been
a
around
while,
forever.
but that you just hadn't heard of them.
Right, exactly.
yeah.
And then I was
That's
like,
what you thought, yes.
yeah, and I was like kicking myself. I'm like, how did this band slip under the radar? How did I not know them? And so I called John up, and he was already on tour. I'm like, who are these guys? They're great. And he goes, I don't know who they are. I'm like, yes, you do. He goes, no, I don't. I'm like, John, you know who they are. He goes, I don't think I've ever heard of them before. I'm like, all right, well, forget you. So I went to the show, and it was incredible. And it was the 3rd live show they've ever done. And I'm like, this is crazy. Like, who does this? Like, who puts that kind of production on their 3rd time out? I mean, 3rd time playing anywhere. And
Well, you wouldn't believe the sales pitch I got, man. I got a phone
oh
call,
yeah,
and she was like, if you don't work with these people, you're crazy. I don't know how the conversation went about maybe looking for a producer, but you told them that you knew, because you saw that they liked Ministry.
yeah,
And
yeah.
like,
That
oh,
was
well, I know John Bechdel from Ministry.
Actually, it was a bit more mysterious than
okay.
that.
oh yeah, yeah. It was
Yeah.
kind of like a mistake. It was like
so I
yes,
sent
that's
her
right.
the tickets and all
That's
that
right.
stuff, and then I get this cryptic message saying one good turn deserves another,
Oh yeah.
and so I'm like, okay, I'm officially talking to a lunatic.
But I'm married.
But all right, and me and Misha are actually at a bar in Manhattan, and I get this message on Instagram: one good turn deserves another. So I'm like, all right, let's see if we can work this out.
Free tickets.
Threesome, what?
I have no idea what that means, but I'm going to play along, of course.
We joked. We were like,
Oh,
like, who is this person? Like, wow, she's way out there. Like, this is crazy.
But at this point, I don't know who Sandy is. I don't know
Right.
that
And
she has
You
this
made the
connection
statement.
to
You said
Ministry at all.
That was part of the ministry. You said, you don't know who I am. I'm not on social media. I don't have
I really
presence.
don't.
I'm not out there. You couldn't know who I am.
She said, "Yeah, you were so kind, and you sent me this stuff."
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like I'm nobody, but yet, Kevin saw somebody who wanted to see a show, and he sent me everything. He sent me tickets. He sent me CDs. He sent me everything, and I thought, wow, this is just absolutely incredible, and just out of the
Karma.
Yeah, and just like treating a fan the way fans really want to be treated by, the bands that they go out and support.
Yeah, give us free stuff.
Well, you know what? I mean, you can listen to it for free on
Are you going to eat that
Spotify.
pizza? Can I have a beer?
You can.
Well, when I knew then it started clicking to me. So then I had other conversations with Kevin. Then I realized, okay, there's no connection to ministry there. I was kind of piecing it together. So then I thought, how can I do something really nice for this guy? He gave me these tickets. He invited me out to see his band. He gave me T-shirts. He loaded me up with swag. What can I do for him? And so then I thought, you know what? The least I can do is leverage my contact with John and at least get them backstage or to meet some of the band members. And so I was like kind of arranging this with John, and John was like, we're really busy. And I was like, this is work for us, we don't just sit around, just like meeting people. He goes like, there's stuff to do. And I'm like, I know, but please, just once, will you do this for me? He was like, please just say hello to these guys, just meet them. I'm like, they put on an amazing show, and I just want you to meet them. Just meet them. And he was like,
But on our side, what I'm getting is, are you going to see Ministry in Montclair? I was like, of course. The whole band has tickets. We'll be there. Okay, well, when you get there,
text.
don't go inside, but text me.
Yeah.
Something's going to happen. So now I'm like, this person's really fucking crazy. Like, I'm going to text her. Yeah, and like somebody's going to hit me with a bat or something.
They're so perplexed.
So I'm like, tell the whole band, I'm like, let's go, have my back. Because when I send this text, anything could happen. So we got there really early, because that's the way I do things, and we got fairly tanked up. And then we went, and I saw the tour bus, and we're standing on the sidewalk, and I text this mysterious woman, and she's like, look at the bus. So I'm like, I see the bus. And John walks out.
Danger Datcher.
And John walks out, and I'm like, holy fuck, like, holy shit. And he comes over, hey, are you Kevin from Chemical Str8jckt? And I'm like, yeah. And now, I already knew that to get to the next level, we needed production. Because our debut was made in my laundry room.
Okay.
And I had no idea what I was doing. We kind of knew how to write a song.
Right.
But we didn't know how to make it sound proper. So I already had that in the back of my mind. So the minute I see this guy, I'm like, oh, this has to happen. So, I want everybody to behave properly. We got to have this first meeting go well, so that we can try to work, to actually work with John and get him to produce us. And I wanted to learn from him, because I hadn't made music in almost 30 years.
Right.
I'm so out of it. And it was a great first meeting. It's like super nice guy. Now to go back.
I did call you once.
You did call me once.
Sandy
yes.
was trying to put this thing together. She was like,
And you had some trepidations about me because of my lyrics.
Well, that came later. 'Cause I hadn't really delved into that yet. But Sandy, from the get-go, was trying to put this together. She's like, you need to work with this band.
Yeah, if you don't work with
she
them,
was like,
it'll be the biggest mistake of your life
Yeah.
if you don't. Because if you don't, someone else will.
She's like,
and
these guys
you'll
are going
regret it.
places.
You'll regret it if you don't.
These guys, it turns out that they're a new band, and this was only their third show, and they're already, they have merchandise and a professional show, and you would not know that they're just a new band. And just imagine if they can do all that in that amount of time, where they're going to be in a year or two. And if you don't get involved with them, you're missing out on a big opportunity. I mean, she really worked it, and so I was like, I'll call the guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now I can tell you from my perspective. So you said if a Pennsylvania phone number calls you, answer it. That's it. You just, if a Pennsylvania phone number calls, answer it. He's at work filling prescriptions.
Oh, right, yes, I forgot that.
And
Yes.
the phone rings and it's a Pennsylvania phone number, and he's like, guys, I got to take this phone call. And he went in the back of the pharmacy. I think he laid on the floor because he was about to pass out. And answered the phone. He goes, hi, this is John Bechdel. And Kevin was just beside himself. He was like, what? Like,
You know where I was?
no way.
Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Were you? You remember that? Well, you remember everything.
Oh, okay,
so.
yeah. Kevin texted
At the
me. He's
Panera
like,
Bread.
a couple letters. John called me. You know, it was just like the biggest thing. And I don't think you filled prescriptions the rest of the day. If you did,
I couldn't. I was like,
you probably killed somebody because
Yeah.
you're just out, spaced out.
yeah, my
like,
crew
it's
covered
crazy.
for me because after that I was just like, oh my god, this is crazy. You know, this is the guy that I saw on stage in City Gardens playing for Killing Joke 25 years ago with Mike and Frosty right next to me.
Who's now playing in Ministry.
Right, who is now in Ministry. He's been in every one of my favorite bands. I'm a keyboardist. He's like the keyboardist. And to get that call was insane, and then to meet it was insane. And I
Well,
thought,
I mean, we just talk like regular people, right?
yeah, because you are just that down to earth, as these guys are witnessing right now.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was saying actually yesterday, because we went snow tubing, and every once in a while, now I just think of John as my friend. But once in a while it hits me, you're snow tubing with John Bechdel from Ministry, you know? And I'm just like, I have to take a minute and be like, that's fucking crazy. You know? And I'm like, nah, he's my buddy. It's not
I have those moments too, like when I'm hanging out with Al, you know, because we spend a lot of time just together because, you know, the keyboard job is very integral, you know, with Ministry, and it's very important. And Al likes people to be really copacetic, and yeah, they did offer me the job a second time because he really felt like that I was the guy. So yeah, so it's fun. Like, you know, we'd go out, you know, to get a bite to eat or something. I'm sitting there just chilling out, eating lunch with Al Jorgensen, you know. So you know, I know how.
It's a bit surreal sometimes, you know. But over time, you become more and more friends, and then those moments just hit you once in a while, and you're just like, whoa, like mind blown. Yes, like when we had the release party for Wretched Things, and you're on the phone in my garage talking to Al, like, hey Al, yeah, I'm at my friend's, Chemical Str8jckt, and I'm like, this is the craziest thing, you know? To start making music again when you're 47, which is what I was when we put out the debut, and to have this all happen because of her is pretty crazy.
It was just meant to be. It was like one of those things that came from the universe.
Well, it's so funny how, like, you know, she really, really, you know, worked it, and I was just like, oh, I'm so busy.
I'm on tour, Sandy. Like, I don't have time
And
for this.
then you sent me the video, and
Yeah.
I watched it. And, you know, I saw you on your bike with your Ministry helmet, and I'm like, cool, okay, you know. And I'm like, all right. And then we talked. And then, you know, you sent me some material. First, I think some MP3s, then some actual stems. And I actually started tinkering. Now, this would have been some material from Dress to Kill.
Okay, yes.
And I stared tinkering.
House Upon the Hill.
Yeah, I started tinkering with that and sending you back just so you got a vibe for, you know, what I do, you know. And that was pretty quick. And then we started to talk. And then we're like, okay, you were like, will you produce my next album? And so I was like, Wrath of Sandy, and also, you know, I did listen to what you were sending me, and I was picking up on, you know, these influences, you know, like some 242, and I was like, you know, because anything, when people approach me, I was like, I mean, I won't turn anything down without listening to it. That just seems ridiculous, right? And if I listen to it, and if I pretty much just know right away, if I hear something, basically, that I can offer, you know, it's not really like, oh, I don't like it, or I don't feel like doing it. It really comes down to, you know, does it connect with me? Do I feel like I have something to offer? It's not about like, oh, can I make some money off of these people? You know, that's just not how I work. So, so yeah, I started hearing some elements of the music, and I even mentioned to you some of the what reminded me of The Resident, which was kind of bizarre because I played you some of that today. It's a little bit obscure, but I heard a little bit of that, and I heard definitely, you know, what you were trying to do, and so I said, look, I was just worried that I didn't want to overcommit myself, you know, and I think I finally said, look, let's I'll tell you what, I can do 5 songs for you. I felt confident that I could deliver that without making you, you know, wait too long. And then, you know, we talked about money, and then you were like, okay, how about 10 songs? And I'm like, 5, 10, okay, you know. And I think it ended up being 14 or something. But yeah, he already recorded most of the music and all the vocals, and so sent me the stems. So really, all I had to do was track guitars and mix. And to be honest, your vocals, I've hardly had to do much of anything with your vocals. That saved me so much time, because vocal production is like a whole other thing beyond music production. So saved a lot of time there, except for that there was like 14 vocal tracks. So per song, so I had to, place them. That was the hardest part. But actually, like, for instance, didn't have to work really hard on his vocal. He had his vocal sound dialed in,
right.
And it was just a matter of just fine tuning. And the music really, yes, was raw, and that's where I actually got, because of that, really had to work hard as a producer, and it made me a better producer, because producing, and something Al taught me, and something he learned from Adrian Sherwood, working with him, great producer, Cabaret Voltaire, Nine Inch Nails, Tackhead, and things like that. Was and something I learned in college in my studying about music production is I think of music as a soundscape.
Right.
Like a canvas. There's only so much space on the canvas. You can use different colors, but if you want it to be presentable, you need to know about colors or frequencies. Sound is frequencies, and so you need to understand and see. Something that I didn't really know when I made my first false icon record was like, I was all about layering. I was kind of insecure, so I was like, if I just have this like 8-bar thing, I mean, people are going to be bored by bar 7, so I'm like, I got to be hitting them with something new and I got all these synthesizers, so, and I grew up on, Bach and Kraftwerk, like, I listen to it now, it sounds quite simple, but at the time it sounded like, the busiest, so my music was too busy. I had just too much going on, too much layering, just like layer over layer over layer, and that's how I built up. But soon I began to learn that, and what Al taught me was like, you need to find a place for this stuff. You just can't have 30 tracks of keyboards. I mean, you can, but you got to find a place for them.
Right.
Because I thought we were going to have to, with false icons, we were going to have to kind of like, mix stuff in and out, because it would just be too much to comprehend all at one time, or that we might have to lose some stuff. But Al's like, no, I don't work that way, He's like, we'll find a place for it. And he did something that I had never known about, which was EQing the left and right channel differently. I mean, I know about placing things and stereo placement. That's a big plus. But the idea of EQing something differently. And then only once did he look at me and lift up his reading glasses and say, "Do you really need 4 bass synths on this song?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Okay. Back to work. I started to learn to strip things down and try to be a little less busy. But then with working with you guys, it was raw. So I really just had to, just start from the beginning. So I had this process.
Well, I'll never forget that after our courtship, and because I would wait, and then I would say, "So, are you going to work with us?" And I'd wait for the answer. But eventually, you said, "Yes, I'll work with you as long as you're not married to that lo-fi sound of yours."
Did I really say that?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And I was like, well, no, it was cool because I get it. I said, definitely not married to that lo-fi sound. Looking to put that behind us because that's the best that I can do. So yeah, we need you.
Well, I've had bands, accuse me of overproducing.
I've heard.
So I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be like that.
It wasn't intentional. We weren't trying to sound like we were from
but like I said, it made me a
that's all I
better producer
Yeah,
because I had to start from scratch. I wasn't taking polished stuff and just kind of, fine tuning it. I was taking, raw tracks, and I'm like, okay. And there was a lot of tracks, and some people will probably be intimidated by that. Some producers don't know how to mix keyboards or work with keyboards. They're like guitar, bass, and drums. So you came to the right guy. I'd already had experience of working with 100 tracks on a song. And so I had this routine that I developed, and I talked to Sandy about it from time to time. I just kind of, and what's interesting is not to compare myself, but I read an article with Bob Clearmountain, great mastering engineer and producer, and he talked about the same philosophy. He was kind of like, I don't really think about it. I don't really analyze it. I didn't listen to your mixes. I just put the tracks up. Pretty much just muted all the vocals so I could just focus on the music, and then, okay, so what's he got going on with rhythm? What's he got going on here with the bass, drums, bass first, and then guitars, but then the keyboards were all, like, how are we going to fit them all in here? And, when I read this interview with Bob Clearmountain, he said the same thing. You don't really think about it. You just kind of just start working, It's kind of like you just like getting in the zone, and you just kind of intuitively know what to do. And that's what it was like. I just started, it was like a puzzle, It's like, okay, well, these drums, like a lot of his drums were stereo tracks, I didn't have like kick, snare, hat, tom, like typically what you would work with. It was a loop.
I would give you a loop.
Yeah, and so there were times when I was like, no matter what I did with the EQ, I just couldn't get it right. So I ended up reprogramming, some of the drums. And then, one of the songs, I think, I was like, well, where's the low end? There's nothing happening down there. So I like whipped out a bass and I was like, played a bass groove. And it was great that I could do those things because some bands are like, oh, like they just know what they want. And so it's like, you don't have a whole lot of executive
like wiggle room.
These guys were just like, you do your thing. And that was great. But also, I was like, I don't want to just do crappy work either, so I wanted to make sure they're okay with it. But it was great. Every time I would send them something, they were just like so happy. And I was always worried that there'd be these battles, or we'd have to, I think one of the first things that happened was it might have been the only thing that's real. One of the first songs I mixed, something about the guitar just wasn't sitting right. Mm-hmm. And it just wasn't grooving, and so at least in the verses, and so I experimented with just taking it out. There were some spots where I took things out, made some holes and stuff, and most of you guys were good at that. But this time you're like, like what happened to the guitar? And I was like, well, it just wasn't really sitting for me, and then so I was like, well, it's pretty important. So I asked myself, what is it that's not working? And I'm like, well, it's just not fitting into the groove. And so I was like thinking, well, what can I do? And I realized it's not the riff, it's just that it's not in the right place. So I shifted the riff like a tiny bit, and it dropped into the groove, and then we were back in action. I mean, that's like pretty bizarre stuff,
Yeah.
That was like...
And that's how we play it live now.
Okay. And that was only like one of the only kind of things. Other than that, like we said today, is mainly just, a matter of, maybe the vocals up or down a little bit, or like you said, maybe a little brighter or something like that. Or sometimes it was just, that's it, boom, nailed it first try. Other times it was like, hey, we love it, but just have a few notes, here and there. And it was really easy to work with these guys. And like I said, I became a better producer. Learned a lot that. Moving forward, even working on my own material, that I'll be able to utilize a lot of the skills that I developed working with you guys.
Cool.
That's fantastic. Now, I just want to ask you next, and we're almost at the end, a signature question that I ask everybody that's ever been on the show.
Where can you find your material?
Yeah. So
what platform?
Where can I find your material?
Well, we'll get there too, but I want to ask you how you feel about the current state of where the music industry is now, where people would rather illegally download or subscribe to Spotify than actually buy music.
Well, I was around and in the industry when the Napster thing hit. At first, I'd heard a coworker talking about Napster. I'm like, what the hell is... I can say fuck, right? What the fuck is Napster, right? Mm-hmm. And then next thing it was like, people... like my financial advisor said to me, so I hear that, the music industry, is taking a big hit and that, might be dying. And I'm like, oh, I've been hearing punk rock is dead, metal's dead. I mean, so now the music industry is dead. I mean, geez, how often can this thing die? But the idea of downloading or file sharing, whatever they wanted to call it, was a very new concept to me and many people. But I guess you couldn't talk about it with talking about the Metallica lawsuit. They decided that they were going to take the approach that you're stealing from us, and we're going to fight back. And the problem with that was they were Metallica, and they were like mega rich. Now, not to say that justifies it, because it's like saying stealing. If you walked into the record store and stole the CD, well, it's a major label. It's a big record store chain.
Right.
You could make the same, and the artist only sees a small percentage of it anyway, so it's not really stealing. So it's the same kind of thing had already been happening. And I remember in the 80s, the record sleeves had this like cassette tape with a skull and crossbones, and it said "Home taping is killing music." Like if we were going to tape like make a mixtape.
Yeah, make a mixtape.
Or tape something that we bought and essentially paid the licensing rights for. They were trying to make us feel guilty that we were somehow destroying music. And then when DAT tapes came out, digital audio, like, oh, people could bootleg music. And the music industry fought really hard to keep them out of the country successfully for quite some time. And even when they first started coming in, they made sure that they had different formats and not digital ins and outs and things that would make it easier for bootleggers. And DATs were very short-lived because CD burners came out, and then you could literally copy, any CD. But then they had to invent copy protection,
which that was a pain in the dick, I gotta say.
Same thing with VHS tapes. There were some VHS tapes that implemented copy protection, and all these things to fight when you're thinking about, like, really, how do you get stuff out there? Word of mouth, and how we first got music out there was like sharing stuff.
Yeah.
So the idea of file sharing, but I believe it was Steve Jobs quickly, was like, okay, this makes sense, but let's figure out a way to make it legitimately. And he invented iTunes and stuff. But yeah, Metallica took a hit, for the way they approached it. But at the same time, if you think about it, they might have not been starving, but it hit smaller artists much harder that were depending on selling records because the traditional business model was that touring was kind of a promotional thing to get your music out there and to take it out to every city and every region, and then after they'd hear you, they'd go out and buy the record. I mean, you used to be able to sound scan, be able to see, like even in the Prong days, we would play Boston, and then we would notice that the next day we sold 400 copies of our album in Boston, and so touring is expensive. There's a lot of overhead. You've got to pay band members, crew members. You have to rent equipment, buy equipment, hotels, gasoline, so many expenses to go on tour and to do a big tour with lots of production. It was not unusual at all, even with the help of labels, tour support, to lose money on a tour, but you would make it back by selling records. Right. Napster changed that, so suddenly people weren't making the kind of money selling records that they were. Bands that used to sell tens of million or 10 million records were selling maybe 1 or 2 million, and bands that sold 1 million records were selling like 500,000 or maybe 250,000. Bands that sold 100,000 records were selling 25, 50,000 records, and so everybody was taking a hit. So the only way to make that back was trying to push on merchandise and trying to actually scale down your production so that you could make money on tour, because concert tickets and merchandise was the only way to make money. So it went from the touring process being a promotional tool, it went to the album being a promotional tool, and to the point of like just giving your music away in hopes that people will discover you and come and pay money to see you play and buy a t-shirt.
And it also seems like now, especially with bands that have been around a while, that like the meet and greet thing has really become a source of...
it used to be, not a big thing if you hung out by the tour bus. You might get to, meet the band or get an autograph, or they might come out after the show and shake some hands and stuff. And now it's like, hey, that you want that kind of access, and you got to pay for it, and got to make money somehow. It might seem cheesy, but nowhere when you buy a ticket does it say, hey, you get to meet the band and get a free autograph, right? So
fair enough.
Anyway, yes, times have changed, but rock is not dead. Punk is not dead. Music is not dead. We keep moving forward. So I wasn't a big fan of iTunes. I thought it was a really clunky program, and I hated the way that it was proprietary with Apple, and that you had to sync your iPod. I like the old media players, more like Android style, where you just plug it into your computer and put your files on there, and off you go. But now they've just done away with iTunes, so even for that matter, downloading is becoming a thing of the past.
Right, it's all
now
streaming.
And so Spotify, and I'm thinking like, well, what if you live in the mountains and you don't have, satellite radio was a thing for a bit, it's kind of cool, but because living in the mountains, radio stations were almost impossible to pick up when you're driving, satellite radio, but then cars, would have, you could plug your iPod in or something, and that to me was revolutionary, because we used to lug around tons of CDs and cassettes.
Oh yeah, dude, I was one of those guys with the books and books of CDs.
And now even the idea of like an iPod, people use their phone, and even now the streaming. So like Spotify, Pandora. It's like when we had to give up vinyl for CDs. It wasn't as good. Really, it's cleaner and digital and didn't skip really or pop, but it didn't sound as good. And then MP3s are nowhere near as high quality as a CD quality or an album quality. So in
You're
that
sort
sense,
of sacrificing quality
yeah.
for convenience.
I know, but yet movies, have gotten, they went from, VHS, which was pretty poor quality, to, some higher quality formats, and then eventually DVD,
Blu-ray,
yeah,
4K,
4K, and that's great, and the televisions too, higher resolution. What happened to music? Why wouldn't music want to sound better? It's crazy, especially because at one point the idea of an MP3 was because files were big and streaming them was impossible. Downloading them took time. Right, on the dial-up
connection.
Yeah, so I understood, but they've never. Now everything's faster, and like I said, movies have taken advantage of that high-speed technology. Streaming, Netflix, blah blah blah. And yet music hasn't really progressed in that.
Yeah, I noticed that it seems like in general you have to consider yourself an audiophile to give a shit about good sounding.
Well, we're going back to vinyl.
Well, that too. There's
Sounds
that too.
But, you can't be driving around with a
record
crate
player.
of records and suspending a record player from the ceiling of your car with some springs or something like that. So, yes, many questions as to the future of music. And when we talk about the technology, like I said before, you would have to have tens of thousands of dollars just for a project studio.
Yeah.
A professional studio, maybe millions of dollars. And when the music industry changed, those big budgets and those big labels, they didn't have the kind of money to throw around that they used to, and so the big studios started dying out, and people were able to make records at home, and they didn't need, fancy multi-track tape recorders. They didn't need big expensive mixing consoles, so it's not as expensive to produce music anymore. And some of the big producers, have had to work for less because they don't have the budgets. So things are changing, and now there's more bands. I mean, back in the label days, only the bands that were successful or lucky enough to get onto a label got known and got heard, and there really wasn't that much to pick from because you walk into a record store and there's only so much room in a brick and mortar place,
Right.
So now with the internet, we thought it was going to change everything, and it kind of did, but we thought it would open things up, make it easier for the artist, and it has, but it's also made it easier for everybody to be an artist. It used to be, hey, I'm in a band. Whoa, wow, that's amazing.
Well, that's the thing I noticed
now
you mentioned.
It's like, I'm in a band, oh yeah, me too, or I'm a producer, yeah, me too. It's like everybody's a producer now. Everybody has a band now, and that's great, except that there's so much music that you have to try to, sort through. As before, you could just go into a record store in an hour and flip through, but, some things we can't change, so we have to look at that. And now there's, there used to be genres, then there was subgenres, and now there's niches and micro niches, like agro-tech and synthwave, and, it's like more and more, and that bothers me too, the idea that you have to be in a genre, or that you have to sound like something, and there's so many bands that all do the same thing, and they all sound the same, I
We were
think,
talking about that on the way here.
yeah,
actually.
there shouldn't be any, and that's why Killing Joke had a hard time really getting marketed, because labels didn't know what to call it or what to do with it. They could put it in the metal bin, or we put it in the rock bin, the punk bin, like, fuck it, it's music.
Right. Well, you had mentioned satellite radio before. I noticed I still have a subscription to satellite radio, and I noticed that they've been playing, even on the rock channels, more and more, playing people that they discovered on TikTok, which I don't even use. I don't really give a shit about what that is, but it's like now TikTok people are getting radio play.
Yeah, well, then American Idol, it was like this big thing, and the winner got a record deal, Kelly Clarkson or whatever, and I remember saying to myself, it's like, yeah, it doesn't really work that way. And even the labels are saying, hey, just because you made it on a TV show doesn't mean you're ready for a career in the music business. But then it got to if you weren't on American Idol, you couldn't get a record deal.
Right.
So it's crazy.
I mean,
if you think about it.
That show got canceled and then came back.
Yeah, well, now there's a whole bunch of them, X Factor or whatever, America's Got Talent, but I remember Star Search,
All right.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's made me work harder. I mean, when I first found out that you could buy programmable synthesizers, that was great because you could store all your hard work and recall it, but Then I found out that not only that, they came with preset sounds that you could just push a button and have a sound. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, I had to go to college. I had to like, learn how to program these big modular synthesizers. And some idiot can walk into a music store and buy a keyboard and push a button and like, voila. So it just makes you work harder.
So the only other thing that I've got left to ask you is, you'd mentioned a new ministry on the way. You'd mentioned a solo album. What is next for you? And you mentioned also, wanting to know where can people find you and your stuff?
Mm-hmm. Well, everything's going to Spotify and streaming platforms, but there's still a demand for physical releases. Kevin had to do it himself, right? Made CDs, and now we kind of
The
been
record
talking
label
about
only wanted the digital rights.
because you can't lose money.
Right.
You can't. Digital costs nothing. But CDs and vinyl, you have to pay for, and then
Right.
if you don't sell them, you lose money. Nobody wants
right.
to lose money. So, but now vinyl is coming back, and so more and more people releasing on that. And people do understand. Some people do understand that, hey, these artists, they have to survive. And if all we're doing is listening to them on Spotify, the owner of Spotify is worth $3 billion, but these artists are struggling. So the message is getting out there, and I think people are like, hey, I'm going to buy the T-shirt, I'm going to buy the CD, I'm going to go pay money to see the band, and there are those people out there. But yes, music has become ubiquitous, and in some ways, it's kind of cool that Spotify, like, it used to be, we'd be like driving along, oh, you remember that one song? Like, there's just like no way, you're like,
Yeah.
I might have it on a cassette at home somewhere, but now it's like, oh, Spotify, boom, there it is, So there's pros and cons to all of it, and we're still navigating it. The labels, in some ways, they were dinosaurs. In some ways, they weren't doing things properly. They didn't really care. Some of them did, but didn't really care about music. They were just looking to make money. And they would just put out stuff and see what sticks. And, at one point, country music got really popular and mainstream. And so there was bands that got signed as like a metal band. And the label was like, we're not interested in metal anymore. Can you guys play country? They're like, what? Because if you can't, we have no need for you.
See, that's a jump. Like you mentioned American Idol and Taylor Swift before she was a pop star was country, and I can see that bridge. But from metal to, the only metal to country that I can even think of was when the guys from Pantera did that Rebel Meets Rebel project with David Allan Coe, and that made sense. But
well, Al made a country record. Straight shooter.
Buck Satan.
Yeah, Buck Satan.
Oh,
Yes,
right.
But he loves country. He really does. Authentic.
Right, old country.
Yeah. Labels typically, were not musicians. They didn't care about if you could pay your bills or if you had a benefits package, you know what I mean? They were in it for themselves. So, to see the labels die, I'm not really losing any sleep over that. And now it does open it up. Like we talked about the internet, it helped bands, but it also hurt bands. But there's also a big shift because bands that had made it and got established prior to Napster still have a way to market themselves and brand themselves without, having, people, once you have a name and a brand, you can still do it. But now, starting out, in some ways, is harder than it ever was. And you would think with the internet, like I remember, like, ooh, Facebook, we're going to send out an invite for our show. We don't have to make flyers anymore. And I would talk to people like, why didn't you come to our show? What show? Well, I sent you an invite on Facebook.
Right.
I don't remember.
I have had so many people either outright block me on Facebook or block me from sending them event invites because I am such a big supporter of the scene that it's like, hey, here's this thing I think you might like. Go to and they're like, dude, you send too much shit. Stop.
Yeah. Yeah. And then like it was all about followers, and so these bands would have like 10,000 followers. So promoters were like, oh, they have 10,000 followers. Book a show. Clubs and stuff would be like, oh, sure, I'll book your band. You have 10,000 followers, and then like 10 people would show up and be like, where's your 10,000 followers? Well, first of all, they're all over the world.
Right.
And second of all, they might not even be 10,000 of them. We don't even know these people.
Yeah, that guy in Italy.
And so now we learned that it's not really about that either. But all I can say is that, yes, music is not dead, and music will be here. It's been here for millennia. How it works and how people make money off it and how all those things, yet to be determined. But music will survive.
All right. Well, I thank you so much for your time and your input and spending some time with me. And don't really know what else to say except thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that was False Icons with the song Awaken. I want to thank John so much for being on the show. Thank you to Kevin for helping to set this up and helping me host this show. You can follow False Icons on social media, on Facebook at False Icons, and on Twitter and Instagram at False Icons Music. John is also, as we said, a member of Ministry, and you can follow Ministry on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at We Are Ministry. You can also follow J Bunny's Music Hub on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Patreon. Just look up J Bunny's Music Hub. And if you believe in what seems to be the lost art of supporting music the way that I do, by buying it, you can also follow Industry Embers at Industry Embers on Facebook and Twitter. And be sure to tweet or post your music purchases with the hashtag BuyMusic, B-U-Y, or it's BuyMusic, B-Y-E. Now, last week's episode was the Chemical Str8jckt episode. Along with that episode of the podcast is a giveaway of the new Chemical Str8jckt album Dark Progression, which was produced by John Bechdel. That contest is still ongoing, so just go ahead over to that episode of the podcast on Facebook and comment on the post that you're interested in the CD. Make sure you're following J Bunny's Music Hub. Make sure you're following Chemical Str8jckt, and you're entered into the contest. Contest is going to run for about another 2 weeks, because next week's episode is going to be with Craig Niebuhr, a.k.a. Synth Lord Trace Aether, who, as we mentioned, was involved in the making of the Chemical Str8jckt song Death Lucille from Dark Progression, and is also involved in the side project Handsome Abominations. So I figure that having this contest run across the weeks of these 3 episodes was fitting. So make sure to head over to Facebook and comment on the Chemical Str8jckt podcast episode and tell me that you're interested in the CD. And comment on, anytime that you guys listen to an episode, give me a comment. I feel like I'm lacking in feedback lately. So if you like what I'm doing, let me know. If you don't like what I'm doing, let me know. I know that people are listening. I'm seeing that there are downloads. I'm seeing that there are plays. But I'm not hearing from anyone. So let me know what you like or don't like about the show, and participate in some of the content. We're going to be running contests like this occasionally. I've done it in the past. I'll continue to do it. And I was also thinking of making that a perk on the Patreon, is to just members get automatically entered in the contest. If that's something you're interested in, you think that's a good idea, let me know. As for what's next for the podcast, like I said, next week is the episode with Craig. The following week is going to be the episode I recorded with Donald Carpenter of I Empire, Blitzkrieg, and Submersed. So keep an eye out for that one in a couple of weeks. I have other emails out waiting for responses. I have people waiting for responses from me. I still have an episode that is supposed to be happening sometime this month that had to be postponed. So we will see how it goes. This is going to keep going. Obviously, we've got weeks of content coming, and I love bringing it to you. So I'm going to leave you guys today with another song by John Bechdel. He had mentioned that he is working on a solo project. So this song is from the solo project. This is Breathe. Until next time, guys.